let's just talk about like how you felt about the remainder, like the trade deadline as a whole. Because I felt like to a degree it was like one of the more dramatic trade deadlines. And then outside of the two real pieces of shock and awe, there wasn't really anything of note.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we with inside information were kind of saying for a while, right? That like there wasn't a lot of like starting level players that were actually going to move teams. And then the Kyrie Irving thing obviously threw a giant monkey wrench in the entire trade landscape. But just like with Kevin Durant requesting the trade like an hour before free agency started, like those two situations kind of happened in a vacuum outside of everything else. Like free agency started at 6 o'clock on June 30th, even though KD, asked out and the wheels still spun, the world still moved on. And like the fact that Kyrie's trade happened to Dallas, like he requested them on Friday, so it was 6 days before the deadline, and then he was already dealt by Sunday. Like, I mean, the reporting has been pretty clear since that KD requested his deal out of Brooklyn on Monday, but the Nets, they weren't willing to discuss it with anybody. He wanted to go to Phoenix. He's wanted to go to Phoenix all along. So the other 28 teams kind of operated as we were expecting, which was pretty much Toronto dangling players and having a lot of calls around the league, but they didn't make any selling type moves. They were interested in Jakob Poeltl, like we had known about since last trade deadline when they were registering interest there. And there was a lot of activity. I mean, I wrote today Yahoo 71 second round picks got traded between January 1st and the deadline, which the other past 4 years, the most was 32 second round picks traded because there just weren't a lot of players out there that were actually worthy of first round picks. And I think that's illustrative of the level of talent that was actually on the market too.
When did it become clear to everybody who was in the know that Phoenix was like the only place?
I mean, I didn't know for certain until the deal happened. But when Kyrie's stuff dropped on Friday, everyone around the league said, "Well, just like my Twitter feed, just like yours, the timeline was going off. What does this mean for KD? Is KD next?" And the impression that everyone got, and especially by everyone I mean like rival teams inquiring, and especially after Brooklyn's return for Kyrie with Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, a first and a couple seconds, I believe.
Yeah.
That was a win now move, right? Like that was a move just like they did throughout the summer with going and get Royce O'Neal, and re-signing Claxton, TJ Warren, and other things to try to build a contender around KD. So, I mean, the thought was still prevalent of, well, if he does, if I mean, he's changed his mind left and right. That's kind of been his MO. So the thought kind of prevailed. Well, he could still do that before Thursday. He could decide. Turns out he did it on Monday, right? And at that point in time, like everyone, it was a holdover thing that everyone around the situation believed that if he was leaving Brooklyn, and even why he requested a trade originally from Brooklyn was the thought that Phoenix could happen, that Phoenix was there, he could play with Devin Booker and Chris Paul. So it just kind of felt like an inevitability if this came around. I mean, Memphis definitely lobbed an offer, let's say. I don't know the specifics, but I know it was definitely all their picks, and they're willing to trade anybody not named Ja, Dylan Brooks, and Jaren Jackson Jr., but he wanted to go to Phoenix, and that was the only thing that was going to happen. So I didn't know, like I said, until Wednesday night when the trade went down. It was like just, I mean, I remember saying on the radio on Tuesday night in Philly, at WIP, and my family, because I'm from the area, was like listening, and my brother so like, oh, like you called KD to Phoenix on Tuesday night. I didn't. I just like had an understanding if he was going to get moved, the overwhelming likelihood was to the Suns. So that's where he wanted to go.
Yeah. And then the second thing that you mentioned earlier too was like that Toronto was just going to dangle everyone. How close do you think they actually were to ever selling the parts that they were dangling?
So I don't have that definitive answer, but what I can say is that they were telling rival teams, and the reason I don't have that definitive answer is I'm not on the phone, right? And like you're
Yeah.
hearing stuff. That's also to go back to like the insider thing. Like at the end of the day, the job is to tell the public what you believe to be true based off of the information that you hear. A lot of times you're hearing, falsehoods or things that are a little bit misleading to try to paint a certain picture, right? And it's your job or it's my job to try to sift through all that and come and bring like the clearest picture I can, right? So with that, like Toronto was telling other teams starting at the showcase, like, we don't know what we're going to do. We're going to take out until the final minutes of the deadline. We're going to have this long, like 8-game road trip or whatever it was, 6 games, something like that, all throughout the West Coast before they came back that Sunday night before the deadline. They were going to regroup on Monday and figure out what the direction they wanted to go. And sure, Fred VanVleet's contract, he could be a free agent this summer if he opts out. Gary Trent can opt out. OG Anunoby is guaranteed to be an unrestricted free agent in 24 because he can't, by CBA limitations, get more than 120% salary increase, which is well below his market value, being that he's $18-19 million player right now. But they were telling teams, like, we don't know what we're going to do. So, and they were telling teams we might be buyers. So to me, like, I'm looking at reading all these tea leaves and operating like the 31st front office and trying to figure out what these teams are going to do because they don't know what they're going to do. It just never, all that stuff I just said to you never signaled a team that was really going to sell. And it signaled a team just like they did with Kyle Lowry in
Yes.
2021. They were going to talk and see what the market was looking like. And then probably the result would really come in the summer. So that at a certain point was really what I expected to be the case. I didn't know. I didn't wake up on Thursday confident, but I fully believed that they were going to go after Jakob Poeltl, and the rest was kind of undetermined. And it seems like even though there's a finality to it right now, I mean, it's late February already. Like June's pretty close.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens come this offseason, especially if they don't continue to rise up the East. They're still, I mean, they're a ways away from getting out of the play-in tournament, which is, obviously not where they want to be when they've got all these guys who are up for $30 million paydays coming up.
Yeah, I thought that to myself. I was sitting in the lawn in Arizona, and right before this, on Super Bowl week, and I was like, do we really actually believe these guys are going to do anything? Like, are they really going to move OG Anunoby when he's under team control for another year and change? Like, it never felt like a Masai move, like a full fire sale. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you're right. It is interesting that they didn't do anything really at all except for, purchase Jakob Poeltl, former player.
In fairness, like they can say no one met our asking price. Like the Pacers offered 3 first, right? The Pacers picks, I believe one was Cleveland, one's Milwaukee. Like those aren't great first round picks. They're late 20s. The Grizzlies offering a bunch of picks. The Grizzlies they're projecting to be, a top 5 record team in the league like they have been for the next half decade. Like how valuable are those picks going to be? So I can understand, the Raptors thinking, well, we did a good job of drawing up this interest to get the quantity of first rounders, but the quality isn't what we're looking for. Like that could be a fair counter argument, but I don't know. 3 first round picks, no matter where they land for a player that I don't know. I don't know if OG Anunoby is ever going to be more than what he is in Toronto. That's also, why would a team give up so much more than what we just stated? Because they wanted to pick, from everything I've heard, the Raptors wanted picks and players and a player. When that's let's say it's Memphis or Indiana, but Memphis probably it's greater stakes for them, being that they're at the top of this echelon here. Are they going to just willingly mortgage all that stuff to be right in the situation Toronto is, where he could be an unrestricted free agent with no guarantees to re-sign in 24? That's a lot. That's a big price to pay.
Yeah, and it's not that much cheaper than, say, like a Donovan Mitchell or it's more than a Kyrie Irving at this stage. It's just slightly cheaper than Kevin Durant. It just feels like the drop off from like a A-list player to, let's be honest, like probably a B- player, but a really good wing defender. It's like Toronto's very Danny Ainge when it comes to getting what they want. So I guess, how do you think the trades actually fit into the rest of the season? Like, do you think anything really makes an impact outside of KD and Kyrie to their respective destinations?
I do. I mean, I think the Clippers got better, and they're going to end up being just a talkable team until their season ends because Kawhi and Paul George are so good when healthy and active, and that has not been the case consistently, right? And people love to talk about they're the big poster argument against, load management and whatnot. But and this is also like the fourth year of this expensive iteration, and they were across the aisle of the KD Kyrie experiment in Brooklyn. Like those tandems came together the exact same offseason in July 2019. So like one potential super team dynasty already crumbled. Like, is the time running out on this iteration in LA, where there was already talk around the league back when they made that Western Conference Finals run against the Suns in 2021 of like, if they didn't make it that far, what was going to happen up top? Like, I'm not here to say that like I know definitively that there's hot seats in LA, but like this conventional wisdom would suggest he paid all this money to put together this, contender that maybe they don't make it to the Western Conference Finals more than once in a 4-year window. Like that would be below expectations, right? So they got better with Eric Gordon and Mason Plumlee. And I really do like Bones Highland. I know there's been some personality stuff that's come up in Denver, but I mean, he's a damn good player. He's on the second year of his rookie deal. That's a pretty good, gamble, I think, from LA. The Nuggets got better with Thomas Bryant. And Reggie Jackson's a nice buyout signing. Golden State getting Gary Payton the second back. Like, I don't think he's a world changer, but you at least turn James Wiseman, who was not going to play for them this year, into someone who was a really valuable rotation piece for them. If I forget, I mean, the Lakers got a lot better. Obviously, their starting five like blew the doors off the Pelicans without Zion, but the other night. So, I mean, the whole conference, I think, outside of Portland, really got better. Your Blazers, like, they didn't exactly buy to move this thing forward here, Trysta. What's going on?
It doesn't feel like it. No, they got a first round pick that is only lottery protected, so that will convey, I think, this year. They're going to need to figure something out, right? Like Jeremy Grant, whether he ends up getting a deal done this summer, I don't know. I saw something earlier today that I forget who it was writing it, that in order to keep Dame really supported, that most likely they would have to sign, or they would most likely have to trade Anthony Simons and Shaden Sharp, which I very much disagree about trading Shaden Sharp. But it just doesn't feel like their philosophy is much different than Neil Olshey's was, outside of just finding more athletic dudes. I think Neil Olshey would have been fine with Cam Reddish. Like, I think Neil Olshey would have been fine with Jeremy Grant. Like, maybe he doesn't draft Shaden Sharp. Maybe he ends up with, like, I don't know, some white guy from Gonzaga that's not Chet Holmgren. But like, I don't know that this is a defensive first team, really. And to me, it doesn't feel like they're doing Dame any favors. I think there's going to be just real quick about the Nets. Like, I think there's going to be books written about the Nets. Like, for sure. I think maybe you write a book about the Nets. Do you think like there was any other way? What do you say?
So it'd be an interesting endeavor.
Right. Do you think there was any other way out of this situation? Like, is just this a series of unfortunate events around injuries and like a weird pandemic happening once in a lifetime?
So yes, but also like that's what happens in every big stakes environment in this league. And it's why people are looking at the Kyrie Luka Doncic pairing as like a potentially combustible situation, right? I mean, you trade for the superstars every time in this league. That's just kind of the MO around front offices, because worst case scenario, typically you can be where Brooklyn is right now, where they are at a hell of a better starting point in this moment than they were in 2016 when their asset cupboard was dry, and they screwed the pooch with the KG Paul Pierce deal, because those guys were well past their prime and whatever. Like, if you do it with guys who are ready to play right now and at the peak of their powers, like Brooklyn did, if it doesn't work out, you'll be able to get a pretty good return back. That being said, like when you do mortgage young players and first round picks in the moment, it's hard to continue to add ancillary pieces. The Bucks just had to send out 5 second-round picks to add Jay Crowder to this team. And when, as the Lakers have seen, especially like when your roster is so top heavy with salary and so much of the success is dependent on just a couple of guys and a couple of guys getting along in an environment that is pretty self-centered and ego-driven and a competitive, small sphere where your contract and your riches and your fame are all dependent on how good you perform on TV in front of millions of people every night. That's a conflicting idea to the essence of basketball, where you share it amongst your teammates to try to be a collective other. So it's just a natural situation where these tensions and these pressures can blow up. And I think it gets so much easier for things to fail when the stakes are that high and there's such a pressure cooker and you are in an environment where you put the onus on yourself to be championship or bust. So whether it's, the Celtics big three with KG and Paul Pierce that we just talked about, Ray Allen left and there was emotions there and he goes to the Heat and the Heat thing crumbles with LeBron, everyone talking about that locker room when they lost to the Spurs. They were so exhausted and they were just glad it was over, and KD and Golden State, and like it just, these marriages, the honeymoon period always ends. So I don't necessarily think it was like doomed to fail from the beginning, or like how could they have avoided it, but like for any team build to be successful, it's going to take so much luck and so many circumstances. And I just think the odds are more against you to sustain it long term, just because of the ultimate stakes that come in those situations.
I actually like Brooklyn now more than I did last year. I do. Like, I think this trade's going to go down to me as an incredible opportunity for Mikal Bridges to prove that he can be an offensive power as well. Like, he was a defensive specialist for the Phoenix Suns, and that was his role. And he was never going to be the guy with the ball in his hands at all times. And I was curious to see how the ball sharing would go between him and Spencer Dinwiddie, because Spencer doesn't like to share the ball with anyone unless their name is Luka. And he's like, that's his role. But Mikal already putting buckets up at 45 the other night shows that he was sort of underutilized in a lot of ways in Phoenix.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a situation where the Nets put together a fun little run down the stretch. Maybe they make some noise in the playoffs, take a team to 7 or something. And then there's a star that decides, you know what, I want out of my team this summer. And I'm looking at Brooklyn because they got a bunch of picks they just got from Phoenix and a bunch of players. I want to go there. Like, Mikal Bridges could be my number 2. Cam Johnson could be my number 3. Like, Nick Claxton is our defensive anchor at 5. Like, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that's absolutely what Brooklyn wants to do, but they're excited that that's a possibility. So it is an interesting place to be in.
If I was Sean Marks, I would say no to any star that wanted to go there again. I think that's the only way you build the fan base to some level of real loyalty. Because the one thing that I realized from being on the fan was that fans just don't care because they feel no connection to these players. And Brooklyn's never been really the place for New York fans to like clamor around. It's always been the Knicks. And so unless they figure out some way to organically build something, buying stars, I don't think is a really great. And I don't think Sean Marks does well with stars, truthfully. Like, I don't think that's his forte. You know what I mean?
I mean, the track record has not been exemplary so far.
Who do you think shuts it down? Like, my curiosity is obviously always with OKC, because even when they're teetering on success in prior years, they've been, very reluctant to keep success going, right? Like, they shut down Shea last year. They shut down Giddey last year. They shut down, like, even Kenrick Williams, I think, at one point. Like, anybody who had a pulse wasn't playing for this team. Obviously, we mentioned Portland. Portland is not on a trajectory for a play-in spot, like, despite what Dame thinks or what Chauncey Billups thinks. Like, who do you think goes Or do you like full, I'm going to sell mode, like for the rest of the season? I'm just gonna, whether they shut down players or they just lose games like semi-intentionally.
I mean, I think it'll happen. Can I pinpoint where? I'll pinpoint where I don't think it will. Orlando seems pretty content on trying to win games and trying to compete, and Magic want to take steps forward. The Pistons, I mean, they haven't had to bench guys to be the worst team in the league. So I don't think we'll see that either. I think Bojan Bogdanovic is still going to be chasing 30 every night. Um, you know, San Antonio's lost a good amount of games after selling Josh Richardson and taking on Dwayne Dedmon into salary and waiving him. I don't think the Spurs have a ton of interest in competing for the postseason. Utah, I would expect to see some more youth movement, some more minutes for unproven guys, some Agbaji opportunity. I mean, they just moved Vanderbilt and Malik Beasley and Mike Conley out the door. Russell Westbrook obviously is not going to be playing for the Utah Jazz. So those are probably the two teams I would highlight the most. The Thunder, I've gotten into plenty of trouble speaking about the Thunder in positions where I don't 100% know what's going on there. So I'm gonna abstain from
bow out on that. That makes sense. One thing about the Thunder I thought was interesting was a recent article that came out that I don't know why even they would do this, that they promised Jabari that they would take him number 2 overall if he was there. Obviously, they take Chet. Jabari ends up in Houston. Like how normal is something that would be very blatantly not true? Obviously, he was not going to be a fit there.
I think two things. One, I think teams say we're going to take you here if you're there, and that can be one of two things. One, it is a promise, and the guy they thought wasn't going to be there is all of a sudden there. Or two, they could say to someone, if you're there, we think we're going to take you, or we're going to take you, or whatever. And then the player and their parents just take it as an ironclad promise when it really wasn't. And then there are promises where, we promise this guy, and then that's the guy they take because they're men of and women of their words, and that's what they said. So, with Jabari's circumstance, I don't know what it was, but I just know that from my reporting, Chet Holmgren wanted to go to OKC. OKC was obviously very interested in Chet Holmgren, and the second that he did not go number 1, I was not expecting him to not go to. Like, it was kind of a sliding doors thing where either Paolo or Jabari were going to go 1 or 3, depending on what the Magic decided. So, I don't know where Jabari Smith's camp got that impression. Could they have thought that they got promised and it wasn't a promise? Sure.
That is Houston maybe broke him. I think he seems like he's not himself. There's new articles about how he cried on draft night when they took him, which I guess I understand, given that this is going to be a losing situation in the post-Harden era. To me, my opinion is the only way he gets out of this jail sentence is if James Harden somehow wants to go back. Feels to me like Houston is a mess, but I don't exactly know why. Like, I kind of know why, but I don't exactly know why. Outside of, say, Steven Silas being obviously the wrong coach for this type of group, what in your estimation is wrong there?
It's a question that I want to make more phone calls about and potentially even go to Houston to learn more about in the coming weeks. But what I can say and what I will say is that, I mean, there hasn't been a clear direction to build this thing forward, more so than just adding top level rookie talents into the mix here. I mean, Eric Gordon has been, in the fold. Christian Wood was there a year ago. But in terms of like, it isn't just like you draft guys and then you add pieces and then things just materialize. Like, there needs to be some type of commitment towards winning as opposed to just throwing minutes at particular players that your front office is invested in and actually like coming in with strategies on how to develop these guys in winning roles in a particular greater team environment. That just doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like they're, back to the John Wall situation. From everything I'd heard last season, it was just, we want to play Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green X number of minutes, X number of minutes off the bench, and like take it or leave it. And obviously he left it. And it didn't seem like there was any more of a I mean, I don't want to discredit the coaching staff there for not having more of a plan, but just from the way the conversations have gone, it just hasn't sounded like there's been a collective, universal, like we're all moving in this direction together, which, a concerted thing is important. Like to have your owner and your front office and your head coach and your like player development guy all aligned on what Kevin Porter Jr. or Jalen Green or KJ Martin need to be doing to Jabari Smith to become this player that you envision your overall team to be, then like any second you're not doing that, it's kind of just a waste of time.
Yeah. I saw this, and I don't know why this is happening, but this is some tea. It's like a tea related question. Why do you think there's this like uprising of chatter that there's some sort of problem between AD and Braun? Like what's I feel like that's very weird.
It's just the body language doctors are out. He clearly was not thrilled the evening of LeBron's all-time record-setting performance, and he's kind of been pouty ever since. I mean, when the Lakers were here in New York, it was like a week before he broke the record. At MSG, they were talking about how like LeBron is going to inevitably, when LeBron was in New York, like a week before he was going to break it, of course he was going to be asked about it. That's just how the media scene works here. And AD was kind of chuckling about it and saying like, "Oh, damn, that's cold," or something like that. When LeBron said, "I'm gonna break it," just like a matter of time. So, I mean, this hasn't been like a long, winding whatever it is. I'll say like I can say that. But yeah, I mean, the situation just hasn't been perfect.
You
So
think it's real? You think it's real?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this has been just a tough season on the whole, where it's a drain generally to be in the center of that storm all year long, where there's headlines and headlines and headlines and people asking about it. And it's not just the headlines. Obviously, things are happening behind the scenes that are not exemplary either. So when it's just not a fun environment to be in, like you can understand why things can kind of snowball and grow a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard for years that the Lakers are one of the least fun environments to play in. Like not just
When you're
because,
winning, it's great. When
yeah,
you're winning, it's great.
yeah, it's like a worse version of like New York sports because it's just different, right? Like there's just different trappings. I saw this factoid. The Celtics are on pace to lead the NBA with 58 wins, and that'll be the first time that a team hasn't broken 60 wins in the NBA since like 2000. And it's the second time that would have happened in 44 years. Why? Why that there is no team that's maybe going to get to 60 and what that actually means for the league?
Yeah. There's just so much talent in the NBA right now, and there's no absolute juggernaut Warriors, or even like it wasn't just the fact that the Warriors were such a juggernaut, it was the fact that it was kind of a foregone conclusion that Golden State and Cleveland were going to meet in the finals for 4 straight years, and that before that Miami was going to make the finals for 4 straight years, and San Antonio was there for pretty much every year. They weren't in the finals every single year, but they were a threat every year for the better part of 2 decades. The Warriors are still here. LeBron's still here. There's still, the old cast of characters that are knocking on the door, but it's considered in the league right now that any goal you want to accomplish, whether you're a rebuilding team who wants to make the play-in, whether you're a play-in team who wants to make the playoffs, whether you're a team who's been a first-round roadkill that wants to move further into the postseason, everyone's under the impression that we're one move away from getting there.
Yeah.
And that's because the talent's so deep. So everyone's giving their best shot primarily, and the parity's been, I think, a result of those compounding factors where the play-in tournament has clearly helped a lot in that regard. Combined with this influx of young dudes where like, Paolo, for example, is contributing winning type of basketball right now. He's not like Luka was immediately in Dallas, but very rarely do these rookies come in and impact winning, let alone like Anthony Edwards is all of a sudden an engine in Minnesota. And, there's just a lot of really good young players in the league right now, while we still have so many players like LeBron and Chris Paul and KD and Steph who are playing at such a high Dame at, into their mid and late 30s.
So let's get a prediction. So we got 20 something games left. Who's in the finals? Are our Dubs still okay?
I'm going Dubs to the Western Conference Finals. However, I'm gonna tip my hat to Denver. And I'm gonna pick Denver, and I'm gonna pick Denver, Milwaukee, little small market finals that the NBA will love. And
Who do they play in the Eastern Conference Finals?
Boston. I think the Sixers had the talent to be in that top tier with those two teams. They're clearly ahead of Cleveland when they put it all together, but they just don't put it all together on a consistent enough basis, I think, to make it through 4 rounds, let alone 3.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be Boston, Milwaukee.
And then who wins?
Give me Giannis and the Bucks. Let's do it.